Hey there, it's Tony here, and welcome to the Dumb Leaders Podcast, episode 52. I'm asking the question, when it comes to sport, when it comes to being sacked in sport, is it the players or is it the coach?
I just think that would be fun.
Yes. Of course, it's always fun. It's always a little bit of fun to ask a question and to pose a question. And to have the ability to be able to answer that yourself is always good. Hey, look, leadership is incredibly important in every aspect, in all aspects of life. It's vital for success for every type of team, in every type of organisation, in every type of business. And nowhere are the results as cutthroat as what they are in the sporting arena. So coaches live and die on the performance of their teams. We know that. If you're a sports follower, you know that. You cheer on your team. You have a connection with that team. You're connected emotionally. You've invested in them emotionally. So you know that. That you have an investment in this team and you want to see them perform. And coaches live and die on the performance of their teams. Players live and die on the performance of the teams, as do, I suppose, chief executives. And in the case of a privately owned team, I'm guessing the owner gets some heat because they're the ones that are paying the bills after all. So when we're looking at the sporting arena, there is an immense amount of pressure on teams, clubs and coaches. And it's unrelenting pressure. And especially so when the results are not there. And it's interesting because when it comes to sport, there's always a winner and there's always a loser. It's always a winner and there's always a loser. Now, some sports you can have tied games and you can have drawn games, but ultimately teams and individuals are playing for something, whether it's a title, a premiership, a playoff, a Super Bowl, whatever that is, they're playing for something. So, and only one team can ever win. That's something. Only one person can win a gold medal. Only one person can break the world record. So there is always a winner and there is always losers. And the sheer weight of numbers is that there's more lose than win. So when you think about some of the facts, so in America we've got the NBA, the National Basketball Association. There's 30 teams in that competition. In the same in America, in the National Football League, there's 32 teams in that particular competition. In Australia, we've got the National Rugby League, which has 16 teams. We've got the Australian Football League, which has got 18 teams. We've got the English Premier League. I believe there's 20 teams in that, in the game of football or soccer, depending on where you are in the world, I guess. And so that sort of stands to reason that, say in the national football team, only one team can win the Super Bowl, which means 31 teams didn't. So in the sheer statistics of sport, we have substantially more losers than winners, right? So only one team that can win, will win, and there's a lot of teams that don't win. So only one team can win the premiership, only one team can win the title. So we've got varying levels of success in the sporting world. So we've got the ultimate success where a team wins a title or an individual wins a championship or a Grand Slam tennis tournament or whatever. But so we've got that as the ultimate success, but we've got these different dynamics around success. You know, we've got teams that make the playoffs, teams that make divisional championships, teams that make grand finals, teams that make it to the Super Bowl, teams that almost make it, teams that fight all the way to the end, teams that punch above their weight, teams that never give in. So these are all sort of like levels of success for a fan and a supporter and a sponsor of a club. So if you can see that the club that you support are actually placing effort into the game, punching above their weight, you are likely to be, I won't say ecstatic about the fact you're not winning the comp, but you're still proud of the effort, you're still proud of the enthusiasm, you're still proud of that energy that's being driven by that particular team to play as best as what they're physically able. Sometimes there are teams that are just better than yours. So where you see your team trying and reaching the level of what you may see as their potential, as a fan, we're relatively happy about that. Even the fact that when we see a team sticking together, bonding and gelling, even in times of sheer diversity, that's like a win to us, because you can see that they're committed to the name of the club, the emblem that's on their jersey or their shirt. You can see that. So people live with that. People put up with that. People love that. If we can see the effort, we accept that we can't win everything. And a team that's tight and puts in the effort satisfies fans almost every time, because, at the end of the day, we wouldn't have fans if that wasn't the case. If we could only ever, if people would only ever support that one team that won everything during the course of the year, it would be a very unemotional space, I guess, the sporting world. So when a team is challenged for results, people will look for reasons, and they'll often look for like a scapegoat, I guess. So is it the coach or is it the players? And when a team is perceived to be not making an effort, the question is always asked: is it the team? Is it the coach? Is it the leadership of the club? Or is it the players? And it's really, really intriguing, because you see it time and time again. Now, in my mind, they're all interlinked. They're all interlinked. And, especially in my leadership coaching, I see it time and time again, where if you don't have the right leader galvanizing the troops, bringing them together and giving them something to work towards, you don't see that in results. Now, I'm an unashamed Dragons fan. I followed, and this is rugby league here in Australia for those listening outside of Australia. I've followed St George in rugby league since I can remember. I've always been a Dragons fan. And the Dragons have a proud history since 1921 in the Sydney Rugby League competition. There was a period of time in the 50s and 60s where we won 11 premierships in a row. That's amazing. That's dominant. And they've got this proud history. And so St George joined the premiership in 1921, and then in 1998 we merged with the Illawarra Steelers and became known as St George Illawarra for the 1999 season. Now, in any way, shape or form, whatever way you look at a rugby league team's performance or any sporting team's performance, this year has certainly been one of underachievement for the Dragons. Now, they are a team of champions. They are a team of champions, representative superstars. There's something like their forward pack, which is where the hard work gets done in rugby league, are all pretty much representative players. They've all played for their state or they've played for their country. So this is like huge. So when you look at the team on paper, you would expect them to be, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 out of it's a 16-team competition. So you would expect them to be up in that top quarter. But they've had just 6 wins this year from 19 games. 6. And there is a very large vocal group of fans that have been calling for the head of their coach, Paul McGregor. Now, Paul has the nickname of Mary. I'm not quite sure how he came up with that, but Mary McGregor must have been something in the day. I'm not sure. But the group is growing. Ultimately, the group is growing. So They have their banners at the games. They've had a couple of home games lately, and they've had banners up there saying "Sack McGregor" or "Step Down McGregor" or "Fail Mary," which is, I think, quite good from a term point of view, because most people talk about "Hail Mary," whereas in this case we're talking about "Fail Mary." But the reality for McGregor and the Dragons is that it's really not just this year that the club has underachieved. It's been for the last couple of years. And probably since, in all honesty, you look at the results out of the team, you look at the player base, it's been since 2010. So we've got a club with a proud history, a coach that doesn't have a great track record, and we've got a very large vocal fan base that have been devoid of success for the last, wait for it, 40 years. 40 years. They won the comp in 1979. Now, once again, you look at the 1970s, we won the comp in 77, we won the comp in 79. The 80s, we played quite a number of grand finals during the 80s. We backed that up in the 90s. A grand final is number one team playing the number two team. It's like, for those Americans, it's like the Super Bowl of the NRL. It's the grand final. So this is a club that's used to success, and a fan base that is used to success. So we played in the 1999 grand final, and we lost, and it was a controversial loss, but I'm not going to go back and revisit that. And then we won the title, the competition in 2010. So it had been a really long drought. Now, okay, we'd played a number of grand finals in the 80s and the 90s, so we were still successful. And as we know, we draw success in our own ways. And maybe some of those teams were perceived as not being quite ready at the right time, those sorts of things. But, ultimately, when you make a grand final, that's relative success. You haven't won the big show, but you've won up into the big show, so to speak. Now, since 2010, each season has been sort of a season of high expectations and under delivery. So high expectations, under delivery. And the fans and the cries for the sacking of Mary McGregor are reaching a crescendo, so much so that the mainstream media are now talking about this on quite an active basis. But also talking about the fact that Mary's job is safe, which sort of defies a little bit of logic at the moment, based on results and track record. So the cries are reaching a crescendo. The players publicly support the coach. But seriously, the biggest thing the players could do to show support is to actually play with some energy and enthusiasm, which they don't until the game's sort of almost beyond reach. They then start to, I suppose, embrace that, the reason why they play the game, and play with a little bit of abandon to try and get back into the game. So, that raises a question on the game plan and the strategy, but once again, I won't go there. But if the players really wanted to show support for the coach, they would play with a lot more energy and enthusiasm, and it would certainly keep the Wolves at bay. Now, the media have jumped on the campaign, and they're finally asking the questions, but they're raising the questions under the premise that the coach is safe. Okay. Now, yes, the club will talk about injuries and distractions, and they've had a few, and the people are doing a review, and people are going to look for answers. And once again, the inevitable is happening. Is it the players, or is it the coach that's at fault? Or is it, in fact, the leadership of the club? So, there's questions to be asked when a club with a roster good enough to win the competition is actually sitting like one win from the last place team. So, of course, there needs to be questions. And in my work, I see this culture every single day, where people aren't playing to the best of their team. Now, we have media commentators that will talk about these players are highly paid players, they're professional, they should be putting more in. Absolutely, fully agree with that. But every day in businesses and organisations, in political organisations, in government and public service organisations, we see people not playing their best for their team, for their organisation. These are professional people with high levels of IQ, qualifications that exceed the norm, and they're sitting there not delivering to their potential. They're not performing to high standards. They're doing, in some cases, the bare minimum. So why is it that in a sporting world, players are expected to be paid big dollars and still not feel, if you're not engaged and aligned with what it is that you're doing, no amount of money is going to create that additional motivation for you to turn up sustainably week in, week out. I see it in the workplace. Professional people, high levels of IQ, superior qualifications that aren't playing to the best of their ability. So whose fault is that? Teams, companies, and businesses get the culture, get the performance that they invest in. Let me just repeat that. Teams, companies, and businesses get the culture, they get the performance that they invest in. They get the performance the leaders invest in. It starts in the chair. It starts with the leader. Whether that leader is the boss, the team leader within a group, a divisional head, the CEO, or the coach. That's where it starts. And it's exactly the same with coaching elite teams. The coach sets the standards, gets the culture they invest in. When they fail to set standards, when they fail to make tough decisions, they will lose the trust and respect from the players and hence their engagement and alignment. And then it will typically show on the results on the field. And it's a highly visible world. Is it the players or is it the coach? In my experience, it is almost always the coach for a plethora of reasons. But associated with what I just mentioned, poor standards that are accepted. When we accept poor standards, accountability is lost. When we don't make the decisions that we need to make, whether it's an ego issue with a troubled superstar or a troubled genius, it could be someone that's starting gossip and rumour. There's someone undermining someone else within the team, whether that's the coach, the captain, the senior players. Those decisions are tough, absolutely, but they need to be made. And if a coach fails to do that, it's to their own detriment. It's to their own detriment. Trust and respect are huge, especially so in elite teams. And as we know, trust comes from competency, credibility, character, and results. They're the key drivers. And when players start questioning any of those foundations, we see a diminishing of trust and respect. The authority that you get from being the coach or the leader will only take you so far. And if you start having those pillars chipped away, those pillars of trust chipped away, the reality is that you will ultimately be shown the door. So is it the players or the coach? I would almost back the fact that it's the coach. And to back that up, there are so many instances, there's examples where long-term coaches that have been in charge of their franchises for like 10, 15, 20 years, and they still continue to get the best out of that one team. Two glaring examples, the New England Patriots in the US, and we've got the Melbourne Storm here in Australia. And that shows what leadership is about. It shows that it can be done. Those coaches own the culture. They own the results. They continually invest in their players. They continually invest in team structure. And they continually invest in the concept of remaining relevant. Because as we know, the sporting world changes. The enhancements come through all the time. There's always a new addition to a training program. There's always a new hack to get the best out of someone. And if a coach isn't staying relevant in that particular space, you lose competency, credibility, character, and results. So, for all my fellow Dragons supporters, yep, in my opinion, Mary's likely to be the problem. Yes, the players may like him, but they're not playing for him, and that's really obvious. And that's where his leadership lets him down. John Maxwell talks about the law of the lid. Our results and our performance is limited by the level of our leadership. And I think that's what we're seeing with the Dragons. We are being limited by the level of the leadership of the coach and quite possibly others within the club. Thanks for tuning in. Please share, like, and review. It helps people like you find this particular podcast. It helps us get found, so please do it. Thanks for tuning in to the Dumb Leaders podcast. I'll see you next week.